In this lesson, we'll watch the piece of footage that our menus will eventually be composited with, and we'll analyze the footage to get an idea of what kinds of menus and information we're going to need to include in our design. Okay, so I'm just starting off here inside of your project files folder, and if you go into that folder, you're going to see Illustrator files and reference files. So we're going to go ahead and go inside of the reference files folder, and let's go ahead and open up that phone footage.mp4. Okay, so once you have that open in your preferred player, we'll go ahead and hit play and watch this together. Now, this type of a shot that we're looking at is a pretty basic kind of interface that's going to be laid out on a table. So it looks like whatever he's going to be working with is being projected from that phone device. So if I back this up, you can see he kind of looks at it, then lays it on the table. Looks like maybe he presses something like a start button and then just starts kind of working with whatever interface we end up designing. So we need to take into consideration the kinds of motions that he's using here to interact with the interface. So we have a lot of swipes, slides. It feels very much like the way that you would interact with this type of a smartphone. So we need to take that into consideration as we design this. Now we also want to consider how big the phone is in relation to his hand, and therefore how big the interface should look as well. So we don't want our buttons to look like they don't belong in this size of a shot, but we do have a pretty large size of table to work with. If we want to have maybe some secondary elements up here at the top, it doesn't really look like he's ever going to actually interact with those, but it's going to look more interesting on screen than only having items right here. So it looks like he's pretty much only interacting with things that are going to be right here in front of him. Maybe comes up here just a little bit more, but it's all things that we need to take into consideration as we analyze this footage. And at this point, I would probably start making a list of the things that I wanted him to interact with just in this precious time that we have here. So we only have this one shot. So what are some of the most important things that you would expect for a person like this working with a smartphone on a table like this to interact with? So some of just the first things that come to mind for me are things like maps, your pictures, especially whenever we get the motion where he's pulling his two fingers apart, kind of here in the middle. We can back that up. Looks like that's going to be just a little bit before this. So right there, that definitely looks like the way that you would interact with a picture if you were maybe zooming in on it. So we want to keep that in mind whenever we start making this design. Now, maybe we don't ever actually end up changing the way that that picture looks. Maybe we don't ever even grab the pictures. Maybe that's going to be designed in the functionality once this gets animated, but we know we need to make something that will at least open the interface that will interact with the pictures themselves. So we'll keep that in mind as we work. Also, maybe something like time or clocks. Now, that's probably not something he's going to interact with right here. Maybe just something that he can see, maybe on the side somewhere. So that could be interesting to design and have this as a secondary element. Something maybe that would show the weather. So maybe something like a little radar or some kind of a bulletin perhaps. Or we could also maybe have a bulletin or marquee kind of scrolling thing for news. So that's something that could definitely be included. Other things that are measured with dials, like maybe your gas or your electric meter, that's definitely something that people are interacting more with nowadays with their smartphones. So it could maybe be something being monitored over here on the side, even if he doesn't interact with it. And then maybe just a folder containing some files that has information on the outside. So and possibly something that would monitor sound, like music. So even if we don't have the sound here that we're able to see. Maybe we have something that's like a levels meter that looks like it's monitoring something like that. And then we can maybe just create some other dials that are fun, that aren't necessarily something that's very descriptive, that you can tell exactly what it's for, but just that have an interesting look. So because we're comping this into a shot, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to take into consideration real user interface functionality. Now, we want it to look believable, but it also has to look pretty too. So this isn't something that we're designing for a customer that needs an interface design. This is something that we're making to be put into this shot to look good in maybe a movie or some kind of a commercial or something. So it's more about the way that it looks, but it still has to be believable. So that's the main thing we want to take into consideration when we're designing this, and we're not having to be so worried about, is this going to be functional in the real world, because it's all just going to be created on this computer. So that's kind of what we're doing here, and it's a futuristic thing, so we want to have fun with it. We don't want to get so bogged down in saying, is this going to be the best way that this person could use this? Because in the end, that's not going to be the final output. That functionality isn't the main important thing here. So we just really want it to look great. I can't stress that enough. So really just based on the kind of motions that we see here, we really feel like there's going to be just some really normal things that a person would interact with, but they're just interacting with it in a more engaging way maybe than looking at it on a tiny screen on your phone. So this is the idea. You can flip your phone over, and then all of the information stored inside of your phone is projected out onto this table that he's interacting with. So really interesting, really fun project, and I'm just ready to get started. Jump right on in here and start designing some of these elements that will eventually go together to create that interface. So in this lesson, we got a good idea of what types of things we need to begin creating to make the design of these menus fit the style and setting of the footage that it will be used with in this final shot.